In Japan, there's an island known as the Prostitution Island. It is named Watakano Island, and it's part of Shima City in Mie Prefecture. It was once a place where prostitution occurred openly, and the island attracted men from all around. Amazingly, that culture led to the development of the island and the livelihood of its inhabitants. Japan is known for its developed sex trade, but a place that gets nearly all its livelihood from the sex trade is rare anywhere in the world. In this video, we'll look at how the Prostitution Island was born and how it developed. On this channel, we'll cover some of the lesser-known topics of Japanese culture. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe. Japan's Prostitution Island, Watakano, is part of the city of Shima in Mie Prefecture in central Japan. It's a small island with a population of only 200 even at its peak, and is accessible from the mainland only by small boats. Few could have imagined that this small, remote island could prosper as an area of prostitution full of lust-filled male customers. From earlier times, the island had its own distinctive sex industry and prostitution system. It has long housed many brothels where men and women could negotiate their arrangements in private. However, in its peak years, it got to the point where male guests at the island's hotels could pick from selections of women lined up in their banquet rooms. The rates were, at current rates, about $135 for just an hour and $270 for a full night. Prostitution is forbidden in Japan, and violators can be prosecuted. As a result, on the island, as in other sex businesses throughout Japan, the establishments put up a front as providing massages or mere partners for conversation. Anything that happens beyond that is claimed to be the actions of the individual customers and the women, and the businesses avoid prosecution. However, as the island's sex industry grew and saw more visitors who were there for the prostitution, the system grew cracks, and more businesses and individuals dropped the facade and openly operated prostitution services. The women who worked on this island have various backgrounds. Some chose to go there to work off their debts, while others were deceived by their partners and sold into it. But unlike most other areas in the world with prostitution, the island is surrounded by water, so it's difficult to escape. Once a woman steps foot on the island, she is almost certain to be sold for sex. Women on the island often bring in more money than they could earn elsewhere, but the psychological strain led to some cases where they tried to escape the island by swimming. Japan has an image of a country that respects human rights, but this island paints a different picture from what we might expect. Why did such a culture develop on this island? Let's look into the history and development of Watakano Island. Watakano Island was known since ancient times as a place that was blessed by the gods. During the Edo period, from the 1600s to the mid-1800s, it was an important stopping point for ships bound for Edo, now known as Tokyo. This is what led to it developing a sex trade. With the large number of ships stopping by, there were many inns for sailors, and the women who offered everyday services and goods during their stay turned to offering, quote, nighttime companionship, end quote. At times, bad weather would lead to ships remaining in port for many days, giving rise to the demand for these services. But at the time, the social values did not see anything wrong with women making a living that way, and it wasn't just on this island that things were like that. However, by the 20th century, Watakano started to attract tourists. After the end of World War II, it became a popular site for fishing from boats and saw a great increase in tourists. With the growth of tourism, the island's economy shifted to prostitution. A certain prostitute noticed the island's popularity among tourists and started her own business. She opened a brothel, calling it a hostess bar, and this led to other similar businesses popping up all over the island. For the operators of these businesses, the island's location made it easier for them to manage the women who worked there. In time, the island's reputation spread among male visitors, and it became famous as a place where women could be bought. Eventually, as mentioned earlier, the prostitution was openly practiced, with hotels using their banquet rooms as places where men could pick from a lineup of women. The peak was in the 1970s and 80s when hotels set aside guest rooms as well as banquet rooms for prostitution. The center of the island was full of video game arcades, bars, cafes, karaoke parlors, and illegal casinos. At times, it got so crowded that visitors would bump shoulders and the business was booming. The nightlife scene was full of lusty men. It was truly a paradise island for them. As for the working women, many of them had no negative thoughts on the arrangements. As noted earlier, some were psychologically worn down and wanted to escape the island, but many others had a positive attitude about living on the island and had fulfilling personal relations. Other people living on the island understood that the sex trade brought in local taxes that supported them and valued the women's positions. Eventually, businesses became so successful that they used temp agencies to hire women from outside the island. But most of the women from outside only served as attractions at parties, and the actual prostitution was limited to local women. But what did the police do about this open den of prostitution? Japanese law banned prostitution in 1956, so the activities on the island were clearly illegal. In fact, in the 1970s, the police sent an undercover to the island to investigate, but the agent eventually became involved with one of the prostitutes, effectively marrying her, and ended up abetting their activities. This officer was eventually arrested along with his partner. The police later arrested a number of people involved in the sex industry on the island, but couldn't crush it. Entering the 1980s, the women and their characteristics began to change. Until then, most of the women were Japanese, but by the mid-80s, a fair number of them were of foreign origin. It started when one of the brothels hired a woman from Taiwan. After that, they started hiring more women from other parts of Asia, such as the Philippines and Thailand. These women captivated their customers with service that the local women didn't offer. After spending the night, they would serve their customers breakfast and even see them off at the harbor for their departure. As they provided a high level of service and they would work for less than the local Japanese women, they were prized by their employers. In this way, Watakano Island was supported for many years by Japanese men who visited to buy women. Many in Japan knew about the island, but it was taboo to mention in public or in the media. There were even urban legends about a female undercover reporter who disappeared on the island, or that all visitors were being surveilled, and the island was shrouded in mystery. Of course, the government knew about the island, but it didn't want the media to reveal anything. In the early 2000s, a book came out which told the full story, and the government furiously protested against the publisher. The same author later wrote a follow-up with another publisher, but the government prevented its publication. In this way, even while the island's local government and many people in Japan knew what was going on, it was deliberately kept out of the public view. So what are things like now on the Prostitution Island? Since the 1990s, the island has seen fewer visitors than at its peak, but the sex trade isn't completely gone, with brothels and prostitutes still in business. But as time passes and people's values and attitudes toward human rights change, the title of, quote, "the island built on the sex trade," end quote, became one of dishonor. In 2013, the Tourism Board of Watakano Island started a campaign to get rid of its image as the prostitute island. It joined forces with the government and police and declared that they would work to make it a safer place. In addition, in 2016, the nearby island of Ise-Shima hosted the G7 summit, which placed Watakano under close scrutiny prior to the event. Many of the working women were arrested and left the island, further cleaning up its image. While the beach had been renovated in the 2000s, it took the summit just across the waters to really motivate the islanders to improve things. Local volunteers joined forces with the government's improvement programs. Through these programs, students motivated by activism were sent to the island and started a PR campaign to improve its image. They took notice that the island was shaped like a heart and gave it the name Heart Island, promoting it on social media as a destination for couples. There are still some brothels and prostitutes in business as in the older days, but the island's image is being changed by the younger generation. In 2021, for the first time, the island was chosen as a destination for school class trips. The island, once built on prostitution, is taking its first steps in its new history. What do you think of this problem? On this channel, we'll cover some of the lesser-known topics of Japanese culture. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe. We'll see you again next time.